violence that is being used by the regime of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, but for the time being, certainly the most aggressive position that it's going to take, unlike what we have seen in Western countries in terms of freezing the assets of the Libyan leadership. In the Arab League, they're just expected to suspend it from the League of Arab States.
And certainly, Eamon, the Arab League has often been criticized as being a toothless organization. If they do take these actions against Libya, this would be highly significant, wouldn't it?
Well, it'd certainly be significant, but there's no doubt people are saying they can do more. I mean, one of the things that we've seen take place in Western countries has been the assets being frozen of the Libyan leadership. We've seen a travel ban imposed on some of these officials. The League of Arab States is not going that far. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that most of the Libyan government's assets that are currently at play in the Arab world are through its investment authority, and many of them are projects that benefit other Arab countries. So they're certainly looking at it with very close eyes, in the sense that they don't want to try to hurt their own economies and hurt their own regimes by imposing these sanctions on Libyan officials. But no doubt that the suspension of Libya from the Arab League would be significant, not unprecedented, but certainly a significant development given the recent developments that have been taking place across the Arab world.
Thank you very much, Eamon Mohildeen, reporting there live from Cairo. Now, reports say Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is considering pursuing an interim peace agreement with the Palestinians. The news comes as members of the Mideast Quartet prepare to meet in Brussels on Wednesday. Reports say the deal would include a Palestinian state with temporary borders, marking a change in Israeli strategy. Moeen Rabbani is a senior fellow at the Institute of Palestinian Studies and a former analyst with the International Crisis Group. He says this does not represent a real change in strategy from Israel.
What we've seen is that since the Oslo agreements were signed in the early 1990s, Israel has essentially used diplomacy as a cover to legitimize its increasing expansion into the occupied territories on the ground. What we've had in the last few months is not only the anti-government protests throughout the region, as you mentioned, but with the collapse of this particular round of diplomacy on account of the U.S. veto in the Security Council, more and more questions are being raised about Israel's settlement activities in the occupied territories. So the real strategy here is not diplomacy, nor the objective of a temporary Palestinian state, which has been rejected by the Palestinians since it was first floated almost a decade ago. The real issue is to get diplomacy back on track in order to allow it to continue to serve as a cover for settlement expansion on the ground in the occupied territories.
Evacuations are underway in and around the Bolivian capital with fears of major flooding. 7 La Paz suburbs have been wrecked by landslides after weeks of heavy rains lose the soil. And now that mud threatens to make the river Irpavi spill over its banks. Rosie Garthwaite has more.
The outskirts of a capital collapsing, one house at a time. At least 400 have been destroyed so far, 7 whole suburbs just swallowed. And authorities say that now the ground has started to crack. It's showing no sign of stopping anytime soon.
This mega landslide is still active. A serious section of this geodynamic movement is still pushing on the lower part of the landslide. Our main concern is that the banks of the Irpavi River could give way.
60 million metric tons of this mud has fallen into the route of the river. Rescuers say that if the Irpavi flows over its banks, thousands more homes will be wrecked. A major evacuation effort is underway.
We've been working all night because the landslide overtook our home. So we now have to leave. Before we lose everything, we have to go.
The unstable area widens every day. People who have moved once being forced to move again and again. The Bolivian government says this is the worst natural disaster in La Paz on record. They've pledged $20 million to help the reconstruction effort. Still, they're also calling for donations to help those affected, people whose lives have been consumed by the mud. Rosie Garthwaite, Al Jazeera.
Doctors in Haiti's capital say they have seen a significant easing in the number of cholera cases they're treating. In particular, they say fewer children are suffering from the waterborne bacterial disease. Poor living conditions mean sanitation remains a major problem for hundreds of thousands left homeless after last year's devastating earthquake. The epidemic has killed some 4,500 people since it broke out in October. In Colombia, gunmen disguised in army uniforms have attacked a helicopter carrying the bank cash inside away with them. 4 policemen and 2 civilians were killed in the hit and run. The robbery proves guerrilla fighters still have the power to carry out high-profile attacks despite the heavy military crackdown in recent months. $105,000 was stolen. Now to the world of high fashion, where one of its icons has fallen from grace. John Galliano, the creative director of Christian Dior, was fired on Tuesday after allegations of making anti-Semitic remarks. Stephanie Decker has the story.
Eccentric, flamboyant, and now apparently way too outspoken. John Galliano, one of the most famous names in fashion, has been fired for allegedly making anti-Semitic remarks in a Paris bar. Fashion house Christian Dior dismissed their star on Tuesday after it became obvious it was not an isolated incident. This after an online video appeared showing the designer slurring to someone, "I love Hitler, people like you would be dead, and your mothers and forefathers would all be gassed." His exit has shocked the fashion world.
The whole thing is very sad. Sad for Dior, sad for Galliano, sad for the world of fashion, for him to exit this way.
Famous for his cutting-edge designs, he was perhaps just as famous for what some describe as volatile behavior, earning him the nickname of enfant terrible, the terrible child of fashion. The media increasingly focusing on what was described as a troubled personal life, but amongst the condemnations, some too have come to his defense. Regardless, it's cast a shadow over a brilliant career and ended one of the longest and most successful partnerships in fashion.
I think we can't forget what he was in the fashion field. I think he was a genius, and he brought Dior to a very wonderful state of brand.
Unconfirmed reports say friends are trying to get Galliano into rehab, and those close to him maintain that he is not racist. His dismissal comes just days before he was to present his collection at Paris Fashion Week. The talk now of who will replace him, and if he can be replaced at all. Stephanie Decker, AlJazeera.
This is Al Jazeera, and these are the stories making headlines. Soldiers loyal to Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi have launched a counter-offensive, storming key towns in the east that had been fallen to rebels. Military officers say they've retaken Brega, an important oil terminal. There have been more tough words, meanwhile, from the UN on Libya. The country has been thrown out of the Human Rights Council, an unprecedented move by the organization. Diplomats hope it will go some way to ending the crackdown on anti-government protesters. While the unrest in Libya is continuing to cause headache for its neighbors, Tunisia in particular, aid workers say the refugee situation at the border has reached crisis point. Dozens of stranded Egyptians